Hey, Shop Talkers, welcome to a Shop Talk 360 chat. So excited to have Glenn Singleton join us. Glenn Singleton is president and founder at Courageous Conversation by Pacific Educational Group. Now, Glenn, you got to give me a few minutes here because I'm going to introduce you to our audience, and there's so much work that you have done. It's incredible. So Glenn Singleton has devoted over 30 years to constructing racial equality worldwide and developing leaders to do the same. He is also the author of Courageous Conversations About Race, a field guide for achieving equity in schools, and also the follow-up book, More Courageous Conversations. He is also the president and founder of Pacific Educational Group, Inc., and has created an agency that has developed racially conscious leaders in a variety of sectors, including education, government, business, law enforcement, and community organizing. Glenn also launched the first Institute for Courageous Conversations in New Zealand, and in the US, Glenn has served on statewide commissions for racial equity in New York and California. Not done yet. He's also been incredibly honored and recognized for all your work. That's through the AdColor 2017 Most Valuable Partnership Award with Wyden and Kennedy Advertising Agency, the 100 Black Men of the Bay Area Community Service Award in 2015, and the Eugene T. Carruthers Human Relations Award in 2003. Glenn, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Shop Talk 360.
It's great to be with you, Grace. Thank you for having me.
I feel like with everything going on between the global pandemic, the economic turmoil, and of course the racial injustices, we're at a point where some really courageous conversations have to take place. So I'm so excited to have you join us. And I'm going to just jump in and start with your book first. Please share with us your book, Courageous Conversations About Race. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, one of the things that I'm clear about in terms of race is that it is a learned understanding and a learned behavior. And so when I think about learning and I think about the primary institutions for socialization around any major topic in our life, it's our families, and then for the young, it's school. And a lot has been, sort of described in terms of the family responsibility and things like that. But if we just acknowledge that families don't have the insight and the capacity to teach their kids how to navigate race and racism, because the evidence shows that they're not doing it well. Mm-hmm. And so we needed to find a primary place to socialize young people into new understandings about race and race relations. And so that's why I focused on school. The other thing is that in my own life, and this is very much a part of what Courageous Conversation is, it's a protocol for talking about race. Mm-hmm. And through this conversation, the most ancient art known to human beings, conversation, we are actually able to elevate our consciousness, and we're able to heal by sharing our stories. And so the protocol is very much organic. It's my own journey through education here in Baltimore, where in sixth grade, my family decided to move me out of an all-Black inner city school that was public to an all-white Jewish school that was in the suburbs. And I had no idea of how to negotiate diversity in terms of race or religion. And so what I discovered in this place that was so new to me was that the issues of race continue to emerge, and I had no tools, and I was left on my own to figure out how to navigate this. This was a reality that was very different than the members of my family. And as much love as they gave, really the only thing that they could do was give me coping skills with how to not rock the boat.
Hmm.
how to not make people uncomfortable with my, insights and understandings about what was going on. And so that's what the book is. The book is really a tracing of my life from that moment all the way up to, as a professor at the university, beginning a company, as an admissions director for the University of Pennsylvania. These have been as working in the advertising industry. All of these stop points were points where I was required to effectively negotiate race. And if I didn't, it had a detrimental impact on my progression.
Wow. It's amazing. So it's from a very young age, and it's really just documenting your life and how you
It, it
can help others apply what you've learned in your life to their life.
Absolutely. And in it is the reality that all of us have a story.
We do.
And sometimes we're just not aware of the language to apply to that story. Sometimes we've never been invited into an experience where we can share that story and feel not only the courage to share truthfully, but the support to actually reveal what's real for us. And so courageous conversation not only gives that protocol to tell and reveal that story, but it also creates the circumstances in a community, be it a school, be it a workplace, be it a family, to be able to engage at that level.
Okay. Now, in 2015, the United States Embassy selected PEG to guide the development of law enforcement throughout the Western Australia area. You launched the first Institute for Courageous Conversations in New Zealand. Now, can you share with us what underlying concerns created this need and what was learned from guiding this development of law enforcement leaders in Western Australia?
Sometimes you are just in the right place at the right time, and I think each person describes that in their own way, in their own tradition. I honestly, Grace, feel a guidance from those who have come before me, of those whose shoulders I stand on, and I call this the ancestral memory. Right. And so I was very close with the generations before. My great grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother. We all were in the same household. So I heard, just wise descriptions of how to navigate life successfully of these four generations. Right. And so my work took me to Australia, and there I met an amazing consulate. Her name is Cynthia Griffith, and she was the first Black consulate in Western Australia, in Perth. And so we met. She came to a training that I was doing in higher education. They were using my book and wanted to have some direct training. And she said, there are a lot of race issues here in Western Australia, and particularly in Perth, that I would love to start addressing, and new immigrant populations, and and Australians tend not to take these issues very seriously, and like parts of the United States that lack racial diversity, tend to minimize these concerns and these issues. And as a Black woman and as the consulate there, she was keenly aware of what race is and racism, and she was able to see this in the population. And so we met. We wound up applying for an embassy grant because law enforcement has been a perennial issue, and figuring out how to support law enforcement to engage around the biases that come up as they relate to race, the unconscious as well as the conscious biases. And so we developed a project and pitched the project to the US Embassy in Canberra. We got funded and did an exceptional had an exceptional experience with law enforcement. The second stage of it was for law enforcement to come to the United States, these people who had been trained. And they met with two police departments, LA and, oddly enough, Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. And they didn't receive a whole lot of receptivity. Law enforcement, by and large, has been resistant to anti-racism training. And so it didn't go very far. But what I noticed was that there was a real desire in the South Pacific to engage in this work. And so my work from Australia took me to New Zealand. The culture of New Zealand was very welcoming, as it is for everything. The Maori population and the Maori people are just, amazing people in terms of the grasp on humanity and the importance of values like empathy and love and care and compassion. And so this was the ideal place to launch a form of our work there. And in truth, 4 years later, this is probably one of the leading edges of our work.
Wow. Now, why do you think that, if you said California and Minneapolis, the law enforcement was not very open to these discussions? But why do you think that's the case? Is it as a country, we're still very young? Do you want to share a little bit on that, Glenn?
Sure. Well, law enforcement in the U.S. finds itself in a broader context, and the United States is not very open to engaging in these issues. In most cases, when there is engagement around race, it's because something tragic has happened. So it's not until we absolutely can't avoid it anymore that we start talking about race and we start trying to deal with it, with the ramifications of racism at the systems level, the institutional level, the structural level, as well as the interpersonal levels in the United States. And so you then look at, a profession that in some ways is born out of a racist mindset. And so the real power of policing in this country gave rise at the end of the period of enslavement and terrorism around people of color, and in terms of out of Reconstruction and Jim Crow and the Civil Rights Movement. There are pictures that just line our history of just awful engagements between people with authority, law enforcement, and Black people particularly, and Indigenous people, and new coming populations as it continues on.
Sure.
Dogs and guns and batons and all kinds of batterings, and this continues to this image of George Floyd that is now indelible.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was chatting with one of my friends, and I never, to be honest, I never heard of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the incident there until like maybe 2 months ago, when I was chatting with my very dear friend Deidre Kirkham. Shout out to Deidre.
Mm-hmm.
And it really kind of shows that the victors are the one who write the
history.
Is that, I'm paraphrasing. Go back and I try to think back, and when I was in school, there's so many things that were not taught or not shared. It's the sins of early America. We've had
Absolutely
these discussions, and they're very sensitive discussions to talk about, but we're at this point where we have to have these courageous conversations, right? And it's interesting because there are some folks that just either don't want to discuss it, or I don't know if they're in denial or they're not comfortable discussing it. I mean, can we speak on that a little bit? Because if we want to have any sort of sustainable, positive change, it all comes from having the conversation first, right? And then it breaks my heart because I also feel too, with social media, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and some of that, obviously purposely done. Maybe you can share some thoughts on that, Glenn. And how do we get our arms around this to bring everything to the table where we can have this conversation?
Sure. There's so much in it. One, the horrible past of the United States has seeped its way into the present and is really, jockeying to be a viable part of the future. And so until we correct the past, we cannot really imagine and live a new future. And we correct the past in our present. And you can't reach back to, Bloody Sunday or to, Black Wall Street. You can't reach back to the Iowa massacre, not Iowa, the Tulsa massacre, without this kind of ill feeling that comes up. Because as human beings, we have to see ourselves as better than that, right? And we can't see ourselves as better than that if we don't acknowledge that.
Yes.
And so what this means is, it means unearthing the disease, okay, so that the disease doesn't continue to fester inside, and treating those wounds that have been covered over, because they have sickness inside of them. They have not healed. They've just been covered over. And
Over.
so when you open them,
Mm-hmm.
right, it's like a horse's hoof, right? When the horse gets lame in that hoof, you have to continue to pull off that new scab that comes on, so that the air and the healthiness can actually be born out of that. And if you don't cover over that proud flesh that occurs there, right, then the horse will go lame.
Mm.
Okay, because the disease will still be in it, and it will seep into other parts of that horse's leg, right? And so this is what the process is in the United States. And courageous conversation is a way of humanly and compassionately, but truthfully opening up, so that we can go beyond, we can move on. And in that opening up, there is so much mythology. It's not history, it's mythology. Because if it were history, there would be the multiple perspectives, right? Be the way that you see it, the way I see it, the way others see it. And when we get together and share those ways we see it, truth will emerge from that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it can't happen in all the ways that people are imagining it to happen, right? It just doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so all of a sudden there's a mass grave, in Tulsa. All of a sudden there are all of these missing people. All of a sudden in my family, my grandfather's brother is gone. And so these conversations can't be buried, because we live in fear that those happenings will reoccur.
Mm-hmm.
And every one of us, particularly Black Americans, carry about 4 to 5 generations of racial trauma. We carry our own, we carry our children's, we imagine their children's, and we carry the generations that we lived with that have come before, our parents and our grandparents particularly.
You remind me of this, what you said reminds me of this Buddhist saying. It goes something like, three things cannot be hidden for too long: the sun, the moon, and the truth.
Yes, I love that.
And
Yes.
and you bring up, I mean, it's mythology. It's whatever, people wrote and people just started reading and believing,
That's right.
or not believing.
That's right.
So
right.
yeah, that's so important. And it's interesting too, because I know on social media that there's a lot of discussion there. Some, very, very passionate discussion, understandably so.
Sure.
And then there's also some discussion about statues that are coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I got into a very passionate discussion with a few of my friends, because some of my friends were like, hey, it's our history. Say, for instance, Christopher Columbus. It's part of our culture and part of our history, and he discovered America. And my view on it is, okay, yeah, he did. But then maybe if we were to keep statues, maybe then the plaque should tell the whole story, that he
That's
discovered
right.
America, and the means he did to take America, basically.
Yes.
That tells the whole story. Just tell the whole story. Because I feel like, again, going back to when I went to school, there were so many things we weren't taught, and that weren't in our textbooks. And it's interesting, Glenn, because in the last few months, with everyone's got more time now, right, with COVID, and we'll touch on that a bit. I did some research, and the .gov, there's records of everything. It was a rip in my heart to do some research to see about slavery in America. There are records of, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds that were kidnapped and brought over here as slaves. That is the reality. It's all public record. No one talks about it, but that's the reality.
Well, you make a very interesting point, Grace, when you talk about public records, and this is the conversation around technology, right? And so one challenge that we face that we'll talk about a bit is that technology is this incredible resource for us. And it's also an incredible challenge for us, because what's happening in the world is people are attempting to have a conversation virtually that we've never had face to face.
Yes, so there's that extra
And
added layer of
right, and it goes so fast.
um,
And because it goes so fast, our attention is also not as long. And what this requires is it requires greater attention, because there are so many understandings that have not been included. And so when we understand the fullness of Christopher Columbus, let's say, okay, and it includes the way that this figure led to the massacre of millions of indigenous people,
mhm.
okay, who suffer to this day because of the absence of their lineage, right, and the wisdom that comes from that. Okay, we do not do ourselves a service to honor this person. We actually create trauma in the society. And the last thing we need, on the backdrop of pandemic, on the backdrop of a government that is at best extraordinarily controversial,
Mm,
okay, and at worst absolutely racist, okay, we cannot afford to have monikers all through society that you drive around and see and then are traumatized by. And these statues were not put up at the moment, like we put a grave marker for, my dearly departed grandmother. We
mhm.
mark that in the moment and we go back to that moment.
Yeah,
These were erected much later in our time
sure.
when we knew this stuff.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. And continuous. And we name schools after these people and so forth. Why would we do that? Why would, if people in this country who happen to be descendants of those who dominated and enslaved, okay, if these folks do not want to be accountable to the domination and enslavement, then why do they get to drive by and celebrate a statue that represents that same thing?
Mm-hmm.
Right, so we're not sitting around the dining tables in white America having conversations about, the relatives that were a part of the Ku Klux Klan, and a part of the terrorism, and the masters and landowners and things like that. We're not sitting around having that conversation about our own families.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then why would we be having it about these heroes, as they're called? If those people in your family aren't heroes and you're not celebrating them, why would you celebrate the people who are doing the same thing at a grander scale?
Sometimes I feel like the point can easily get lost because there's so much misinformation out there. People don't even listen anymore, or they at the very
Right.
or online they don't read. Everyone's just jumping on the bandwagon, and
Sure,
that's why I think there needs to be some sort of forum where we can.
sure. And that's what we do.
Yeah,
That's what we do.
yeah.
So when the pandemic emerged, and within weeks, our entire operation is brought to a screeching halt, because our work has mainly been a face-to-face engagement
Mm-hmm.
of developing racial consciousness and promoting racial healing
Mm-hmm.
in, training formats that go anywhere from a couple of hours to a couple of days. And in this moment where we can't get together, we had to figure out very quickly how to still bring the communities together, because there's more trauma now. The COVID statistics show or give indication to the systemic racism in the United States, where healthcare is not equal, where education is not equal, where housing is not equal. People are in situations where there's going to be, closer proximity and therefore more spread. And so COVID really gives us a window into our society and causes us to look in the mirror at what we actually do each day to exacerbate these disparities that are racially based, or to mitigate and to challenge them. And so one of the things that challenges them is giving people sustenance to just be in a space where they can talk about what's real for them and not, worry about people cross-examining them and questioning their, the validity of their stories and so forth. And we did that. We brought people together all over the globe. And this was because we knew that this was important. This is what people need to heal. We need to be in community. We need to hear the different stories to understand how life is treating us differently, and then ask, why is that?
And then is that documented, Glenn, to be shared amongst the group? How's that look like when they're sharing their stories, or is it just the conversation? It's all in speak.
Well, only one time did we actually record because people, don't want their stories recorded. And in order for people to feel safe and to allow themselves to go to that place of vulnerability, that place of deep fear and worry, you gotta give them the best conditions for that. And one of them is that this forum is just for us right now. One time we recorded because we needed for the history books, really, to show that this is how people come together and heal. It's not denying people access to their narrative and having us withhold those narratives as we've done over the history in this country. It's really in the moment to share what's going on for each and every one of us and hear how, wow, this is affecting you very differently than me. I wonder why that is. Okay, there's gender issues, there's race issues, there's generational issues, there's economic issues. Many of those things we're willing to talk about. We'll talk about how the Generation X and millennials and so forth do this or that differently. We'll talk about, the different ways that perhaps women engage in conversation and when emotion comes up and things like that. But when we get to race, all of a sudden there's this presumption that we need to go silent, that this is not something we talk about, and thus we never develop skills or the emotional intelligence to have that conversation. That's what we believe we could change. And that's what we've been changing.
Okay.
Well, there is there's a missing conversation that is essential when talking about race, and that is a conversation about power. Okay, and so whether it is positional power or moral power, there are a variety of power sources. And so there is not a time in the day when the powerful don't offend the powerless. Okay, not a time in the day, because to be in power is to exert your way of life, however it is, be it male power, be it, racial power, be it, economic power, be it political power, whatever the power is. There's always a source of power, and human beings are negotiating power. It's Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator, who talks about this, and when the powerful are quiet, okay, it ensures that they remain powerful. Because power is only negotiated through language and engagement. And as long as we don't talk about the uneven sources of power, the top of the corporate ladder in the United States lacking racial diversity, lacking gender parity, okay? As long as we don't talk about that, it stays the way it is. And so people are going to be offended when they are the powerful, because the experience of life is about this quest to create equality around power. And so in race, there is a visual power. You can see it, okay? My white friends do not carry 5 generations of racial trauma with them every day. Okay, so when they watch George Floyd, being murdered by those who are supposed to protect and serve, okay, in the most gruesome, heinous way, and I've not watched this tape, I don't need to see it.
I don't
okay?
either. Yep.
Right, and once you see it, you can't not see it. But when my white friends watch that, they may have one other tape. They may have seen Freddie Gray in Baltimore. They may have seen, Ahmaud Arbery recently. But these are moments that they can easily lose sight of when they go out and do their grocery shopping. Okay? That's not what happens for me. Okay, I go way back to what it must have looked like for my grandfather's brother to be lynched in South Carolina. Okay, and I go through the ages of trauma, not necessarily ending in the death at the hands of law enforcement, but near death experiences or the fear that death could occur. Powerful people are not carrying that because their source of power is that they get to apply all of their understanding and energy and excitement and personality to other things because they don't have to carry what I'm carrying, what you're carrying, right? And so when I bring that up, that's a challenge to the power already.
And it's uncomfortable.
Okay, that's right. And because power does not have a lot of capacity to be uncomfortable, because part of being powerful is to not be uncomfortable.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And so the powerless, in order to achieve this vision of freedom and equality and all of these values that this country professes to embrace, the powerless have to continue to say, this is absent here. Okay, I don't feel freedom here. I don't have voice here. I'm not allowed to share my perspective here without retaliation from the powerful. And that's ultimately what we're talking about when we talk about race. And so me just sharing my story discomforts those who have racial power, who are white. And what we have to do is we have to help build the capacity of the racially powerful people. White American people need to develop a capacity to be in the discomfort so that we can evolve. And until they have that capacity to be more uncomfortable, they're going to respond poorly. There's going to be a fragility that occurs. There's going to be an inappropriateness that occurs. And then we have a second level problem because now I have this story that reveals the inequities that are caused or illustrated through COVID-19. But I also have to deal with my white friends and colleagues' fragility in not being able to hear the truth of that matter. That's a lot.
So my background is I'm Chinese, born in New York. My parents come from Hong Kong, and prior to that, they were in the mainland in Canton. I used to hear stories all the time as well, too, when my grandfather came over in the 50s. The racism there, the prejudices there, but it was different. It was not as bad as the Black community, as the African American community has endured through these centuries. With COVID now, there's been a lot of hate crimes against Asians,
Right.
whether it's Japanese, Korean, Chinese, there's been a lot of hate crimes. So it's interesting because when I speak about that, or I mention that sometimes on podcasts in passing, there are so many people that never even heard of it. And I'm like, they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, Asians are getting beat up. They're getting beat up, or they're getting attacked. They're getting, they're getting attacked verbally or physically, and it's because they're being blamed for coronavirus. And of course, we do have a current sitting president that calls it the Kung flu, which is a big problem as well, right? So that hits home to me. And that's something that I've been carrying since coronavirus, the safety and concern for my family members, for my son when he leaves the house. So although we walk very different paths, they're similar, in our journey and in our pain, and it's interesting because it's almost, I don't want to say tone deaf is maybe too much of a strong word, but there are some of my friends that they choose not to recognize it. Even when I bring it up in conversation, it's almost kind of like, oh, well, what? I haven't heard of that. And they'll just move on to something else. And that's That's near and dear to me. You're absolutely right. I think some folks, they need to learn to be uncomfortable so that we can have conversations.
And to recognize that part of the human experience is about discomfort,
Yes,
because
that's right.
growth pain, it's called, right? Growth pain. And so, it is this relinquishing of these viewpoints, these beliefs that are formed in isolation of people's stories, right? People's narratives. So if I weren't connected to my Chinese American chief of staff, okay, and very close in our families, this is we've been friends and colleagues, and our families are connected, and we talk all the time.
Mhm.
That's how I get what the experience is.
Yes.
Okay, but that's not how I feel it. Okay, how I feel it is because it hurts my friend Chris and her family, and if she is hurt,
Mm-hmm.
I'm hurt.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the other challenge in this big country that is intensely segregated. Okay, in order to be successful as a person of color in this country, you have to understand the white American experience. In order to be a successful white person in this country, economically speaking, you don't have to understand anyone's experience but your own. That's changing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so a successful human being has a bigger dimension than the economy, the economic variable.
Sure.
And that is indeed the struggle right now. Do
Yep.
we focus on the economy, or do we focus on humanity?
Yep. On
Right?
coping.
Humanity is saying,
Mm-hmm.
that's right. Okay. And humanity is saying, wait, we need to get well. And the economy is built on subjugating the most vulnerable populations.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And so we are at this inflection point now where we are making a decision about something much larger than the economy, than race. It's about whether we're going to be human beings, and whether we're going to recognize that your livelihood is intricately connected to mine.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't understand what those in my human experience are doing to you, just by virtue of the way you look, or where your ancestors and your elders are coming from, as immigrants or born and whatever, right? If I don't understand that, then I'm not fully human. And life is about me aspiring into my fuller humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And so white Americans cannot continue to live in racial isolation of the majority of people in this world, and quickly becoming the majority of people in this country. If they are not to be left behind, they need to understand how the world treats us, how the US treats us, how New York City treats you. Okay. And in that way of understanding, we get to collectively change that.
Mm. Yeah, and
That's why the conversation's critical.
you're right. It is. We are. This is the perfect storm, right? We have
That's it.
coronavirus going on. We've got
One,
the economy in turmoil, and we've got
two,
racial injustices, right?
three.
And you're absolutely right that it's at this inflection point where, okay, are we going to be decent human beings? At the end of the day, that is the question. But yet,
Always is.
we still have people that are, and again, maybe I've learned something from our chat. Maybe it's their own discomfort with accepting coronavirus or believing it exists. Because there is still a population out there, Glenn, that believes
Absolutely.
that coronavirus does not exist. They refuse to wear a mask. Just put on the darn mask, put on the darn mask. They refuse to wear a mask. And it's just this constant, like, well, it's the media, well, it's the far left, it's trying to steal an election, whatever the excuses are, people are dying. And you can tell that this is a problem because there were certain states that were actually adjusting the cases and the case numbers, that I've
Okay.
read. And when I read, by the way, I read multiple sources. I don't read just
Hmm.
one news channel. I make it a point to try to, as my best, try to stay informed and not influenced. So that's what it's come down to.
So what happens is, and this is part of the work that we do, and there are tools to be able to navigate this, right? So we have all of this information,
Yep.
right? And the information can become overwhelming, and it can start to affect your belief of whether we can actually get better, whether we can evolve,
Mhm.
whether there is reason for hope for the future, right? And if you remember back to being a child, the key description of being a child is you get to have this innocent hope. The world just gets better every day. You wake up, and if you're fortunate, as you and I have been, and fortune is relative, but to wake up and to not be worried that you're going to be starving or
Mhm.
have shelter. And everybody doesn't do this, and there are disproportionalities in terms of who gets to wake up not worried about where the next meal's coming from, or if there's going to be shelter from the harmful elements, right? And so what we said is that we need to be able to give people tools to actually have this conversation, right? And what happened over the past 30 years is that increasingly more people have needed these tools and are calling out for them.
Mhm.
And so up to, 5 or 6 years ago, my team of, roughly 30 people could go out into the US, and we could train bunches of people, and, folks would send back great feedback, and their families are better, and the school systems are starting to work better. And then there are these forces from the outside, okay, that find this threatening, okay, because it's a challenge to that power, to that privilege, okay, to always be able to wake up and believe a better day is coming, right? To not have to deal with the disparities and the anguish that we're dealing with, to not have to worry about, the leader of the free world racializing a virus and in this racist way causing a pain on people. People don't have to worry about that. And so what we said was the society doesn't heal until all of us come into this, until people of color stop carrying a disproportionate weight and pain and discomfort. We need to balance that a little bit, and we need to do that in the most compassionate way. And so the protocol for courageous conversation brings that forward. And then we get to this magical spot where more people really want this protocol. And so we had to figure out how technology could help us to do that. And that is, recognizing that for everybody walking around today, they're going to have this.
Mhm.
And how do we give everyone an opportunity to use this device, this private device, me and my phone, okay, to actually get better around race? And so we are creating an app that allows people to, at their own pace, go about becoming as good as you and I, Grace, are right now in this conversation. We're discomforted by the reality of race.
Sure.
Okay, but
Yeah.
we've established a relationship where you can tell me about your family, and you can tell me about your father's fears, you know, and the ancestry coming from Hong Kong, coming, into this country that was not open and accepting. And I can talk to you about growing up in Baltimore, and those become our way of seeing we lived in the same world.
Mhm.
Okay. And what we want is we just want to make sure that the next generations don't have to suffer the way that we have. And most of our white friends, if we say that, they'll say, well, we don't want them to suffer anyway. There is the call for consciousness. And your life doesn't have to get worse as a white person to make sure that our children of color, okay, actually have a fair and open process that allows them to experience the fullness of what this country and what this world can provide. And
Mhm.
so we're going to use this app. Okay, and we've created it in the most entertaining way also, because we know what we're competing with. Okay, people want to scroll Instagram and TikTok and all kinds of things. We want to hunt for jobs on LinkedIn. I give all of them plugs because they have added to our society in certain ways, but none of those platforms have helped us with this human challenge of racism. And so this is what we want to do. We want to build from the excitement of the handheld device. We want to build from all of the brilliance of people like David Ortiz, you know, who is a developer, who has made unbelievable games, okay, who calls in because he wants to make the future of his kids better. So he's developing with us this extraordinary game called Courageous Conversation that allows people to just sit on the subway, that allows people to be in the workplace and get better, and then be able to engage like we're engaging and create better work in advertising and media and technology and government and all of those things. And why wouldn't we do that? Right? And if everybody can have it in their hand and everybody can get better and we can communicate together and be in connection, okay, in cohorts in the workplace or as a family, wow. And that's what we're going to put into the world by the end of the year.
Wow. I'm excited for that. That's going to be very powerful.
Yes.
That's going to be
We've taught people how to do it face to face, you know, and you can look around the world, you can type in Courageous Conversation, you can go to any of those organizations, their testimonies of how people have been transformed, right? Because we grew up with this belief that we couldn't do this. And all of my life, I refused to believe that because I'm here as evidence that we can do it, right? And so now we're going to go to scale with it. And that's the beauty of technology. We're going to give something else in the tech space that doesn't injure people the way that the chats are injuring people right now.
You're right. The chats are injuring people.
Oof. Wow. It's, you know, my mom is the biggest Facebooker I know. Okay. And it's such a wonderful thing for her because it really does connect her to the world as she's 75 years old. And, you know, and particularly now when, you know, she's a vulnerable population. And she has this global friendship based on our travels and my work and all kinds of things like that. But she is using Courageous Conversation to improve the conversations, the chats that are going on all these different platforms. And it's amazing. Wow. You know, she's a teacher right there. And so if she had a little assistance, you know, where she could refer the masses, because you can't refer the masses to come to a training. You know, you can go on my website and there's an academy with all of these trainings and they're exciting and everything. And people are taking them like crazy, but the masses hold a cell phone.
Okay. Now, you working with many larger corporations, I'm sure, training their leadership. Yes. And I can't help but to notice with the last few weeks, there are many major corporations out there coming out saying they stand in solidarity and so on and so forth. And I do have to say that there was one person on one of those chats, I think it was LinkedIn, that person said, oh, you stand in solidarity with racial equality. Let me see photos of the people on your board. I mean, it's just, that was a call out.
That's right.
What?
Yes.
But it's a necessary call out because it's true, you know?
That's right.
And so it's interesting because, you know, I want to believe in my heart of hearts that as humankind, we're going to turn the corner on this and people are going to get into the conversation. But I hate to say this, and I'm probably going to piss off a lot of folks, maybe some folks, but I kind of feel that there are some companies out there that will they'll use it as a tagline.
Absolutely.
And that's, and they'll be,
but they know it.
Eventually they will be called out. If there's no,
they know it.
They know it though.
They know it. That's right. So let me encourage us to at least consider that we've turned a corner in society. Okay. Now we're looking at a new street. And the question is, do we go down that street or do we run back around the corner where it's familiar? Okay. And there's no question that we've turned the corner, right? And that's what you're hearing from these corporate voices. So any company at this point that is in the Fortune anything that has not made a statement to its employees they are in grave danger of losing the moral majority, okay? Because we know that something needs to be said in the workplaces where we spend the greatest amount of our time, all right? So whether the leader sees this, the CEO, the C-suite, whether they see this as a moment, a movement, or an evolution, shows up in the response, not the initial response, but the second and third response. So don't be moved by the initial response, because when a big corporation that already gives $100 million to charity X, Y, and Z decide that they're going to give that 100 million now to ABC, there's no difference. And absolutely, those charities, mine included, the Courageous Conversation Global Foundation, is excited about the opportunity to partner with all of these corporations and have resources to do the much needed work that we need to do. Okay, but at the end of the day, we can't continue to partner with organizations that show no racial diversity in its leadership. Why? Not because of our moral stand, but because we can't depend on those resources, because as soon as the pressure's off, the moment, okay, that money's not going to be there. And we need this in perpetuity until the problem is gone. Okay. And so it's nothing for these corporations to give, you know, what is an accounting error for many of them, okay, in terms of a resource. It sounds huge to the powerless, okay? Yeah, it's fantastic, but it's just in the moment. If it's a movement, then there's another kind of response, okay? Not only the, you know, giving some money or making Juneteenth a holiday or sending out a letter saying this is horrible, what we saw with George Floyd, and we're gonna step up our efforts, but you need to see in the movement some deeper aspects that are sustainable, okay? Because a movement is about sustainability. And so what makes that sustainable? The voice of those that made the moment, something that happens in more than one moment, over and over again. So who are those people that champion this from the heart? Who are these people who are willing to say in these corporate spaces, I'm not willing to work for a company that doesn't hold these values continuously, not just in the moment of crisis? Right? And I want to see those people, right? Because that's the audit now. You should be asking your company, who are those people who are going to prolong this, sustain this, you know, be there after we forget George Floyd, unfortunately. And then the evolution. The evolution is about making sure that it's not just putting one person of color on the board and one person of color in the C-suite. And because it's Black Lives Matters right now, make that person Black and make that person a Black woman, okay, so that we can start checking off all the boxes, and we know what that feels like. Because there's nothing set in the organization to really hold that in place, not even as a movement, right? But the evolution is the careful thinking. They're not acting right now and acting in a knee-jerk way to change that board. They are going into the planning process. They are looking systemically at why this is still the condition that there's no racial diversity there. Because they've got to dismantle those structures so that when you put someone there, they don't go away as soon as they start to bump up against all of those ways that the organization has been built over time to not be inclusive, to not be equitable.
So from a corporate level, from a company, an organizational level, it's facing their own discomforts as well.
Absolutely. That's the key. In Courageous Conversation, there are 4 agreements, okay? And these 4 agreements have to be in place for evolution to occur, okay? For sustainability to occur, for even the moment to make sense. The first agreement is we have to stay engaged, okay? So there are all kinds of forces, you know, we're busy, you know, not enough time, not enough money, all that stuff, right? We have other things to do, but we have to stay engaged. We also have to experience discomfort. Yeah, because discomfort is the indication of change. And that's what we're about. That's why we're here. Okay. We have to speak our truth, because if we don't speak our truth and each of us holds a truth, then we will never know what the the combined truth is. We will never know what the real thing that we're negotiating is. Okay, we will be operating and changing around the mythology versus a reality, okay, of what people are experiencing on the ground. And we have to expect and accept non-closure, okay, which means that this podcast ends in a bit, okay, and we have other things to talk about, and we commit to continuing that. So in a corporate space, you can't be looking for the silver bullet. You can't be looking for, the person you bring in to change the whole, problem, because you're not going to find that. And in the search of that, you'll wind up doing nothing, because that perfection is actually the enemy of progress. Okay, that belief that we can just figure it out and solve it. Okay, what we have to do is we have to greatly improve it in measurable ways. And that's what we're looking for.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like we didn't get to half we've covered my questions just in our conversation. I feel like we can go on and on and on. So
let's come back.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. I would love to have you come back and we'll review and see. Hopefully there will be progress with these courageous conversations that many folks need to have. So
there's going to be progress.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, I am hopeful. I am very hopeful there will be. Now, just to wrap up, so there's so much uncertainty, Glenn, between coronavirus, economic strain and pressures people have, and of course now the fight for racial equality. So with all this uncertainty and all these moving parts, share with our audience as we wrap up, what do you know is true?
What I know is true is I have the blessing of life. I am able to breathe. I am able to speak. I am able to think. And with that comes a recognition that I have opportunities available to me that my ancestors did not. And with all of that opportunity comes extraordinary responsibility. And so I am so hopeful right now. I have never seen a time in our life like this. I am prepared for the discomfort that comes with this growth. People lost their lives in order for us, Grace, to have this conversation today.
Absolutely.
And so I don't believe that we need to lose our lives to go forward. I believe that we need to touch our humanity in a deeper and more profound way, really care for each other, really offer that difficult practice of love, and be able to humanize each other the way we hope to be humanized as we go about our daily lives. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lean into this moment. I'm going to draw from the power and the wisdom of my ancestors. I'm going to protect and listen to the elders. And I'm going to cherish that hope that is abundant among the youth.
Thank you so much, Glenn, for sharing that. I feel like that should be a mantra. It was just it really, really sunk in, and it was just so calming to me to hear you speak those words and reassuring. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Grace,
for joining us.
It's been great talking to you.
It's been great talking with you too. I'm sure we'll be talking again in the future. Glenn, just a quick shout out if audience members wanted to reach out to you.
Just visit courageousconversation.com. That's our website. And on there, you can contact us. You can be a part of our academy, which is a new and exciting, easy 2-hour way of upping your learning and building your community. And we have all kinds of exciting opportunities just pop up on that website. You can also go and support our efforts with the Courageous Conversation Global Foundation, okay? And that will give you an opportunity to see how we're processing healing in communities that often are neglected. So that's ccglobalfoundation.org.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenn. And I look forward
to Grace.
with you again, and also following up on the progress and when you do launch your app, which
Thank
will
you.
be this year.
Come back and let you know.
Okay,
It's going to be toward the end of the year. It'll be exciting.
wonderful. Thank you so much, Glenn.
Thanks, Grace. Okay, you take care.
You
Have a
too.
good weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.